I'm out here playing some sort of fucking bullshit game because I'm not. Mark Zuckerberg is not real. He's a fucking robot, bro. Are you going to crash again? I fucking dare ya. Mark Zuckerberg is a clone, bro. And you just don't know that. You guys are stupid. You think that he's real. Bro, he ain't real. He ain't. A social media influencer who shares their life to tens of thousands of people online and amasses the following. You would think that when they died, the circumstances surrounding their death would be widely known. But in the case of Sherry Shriner, that simply isn't the case. And Sherry wasn't just some ordinary content creator. This was a woman who was exposing the darkest secrets of the world that related to all of us. Throughout the 2000s, she would write books, she would give speeches at seminars, she hosted a weekly radio show where she'd spread this truth. She owned and operated multiple websites, and this would gain her a following of over 20,000 on Facebook and 30,000 on YouTube. And although the numbers aren't in the millions, her supporters were extremely dedicated. In fact, people would call them a cult. You see, what Sherry was exposing was the fact that these reptilian aliens had infiltrated the government and they were controlling everybody. They ate humans, and in fact, 1 out of every 4 people was a direct descendant of one of these reptilians, which was extremely bad. These reptilians, these aliens were demonic. They were servants of the devil. And Sherry herself had this super interesting backstory. You see, at one point in time, Sherry herself was a Satan worshipper, and she wasn't just some Joe Schmo run-of-the-mill Satan worshipper. She actually communicated directly with the devil, and they would go on these long walks in heaven together. I'm not sure why the devil's in heaven, but okay. And it was during these walks where the devil, Lucifer himself, would tell Sherry what his plans were for all of us. So it was from that point on that Sherry decided, you know what, I've got to spill the beans on this whole operation. I've got to speak my truth. And her truth would lead to death and moida. Sherry was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1965. Her parents were Lutherans. They were members of the Lutheran Church, and they were very religious. So that was the environment Sherry was growing up in. And it was at a young age when the devil would make contact with Sherry. And this is where Lucifer would try to convince Sherry to be a supporter of his, and this is where they would go in those long walks through heaven. And the devil was pretty convincing because Sherry bought it hook, line, and sinker, and she became a staunch supporter of his. But again, she's very little. So while other children were playing with toys, she's having these very deep conversations about the fabric of our existence. She's very in tune to this stuff. But again, as the story goes, at some point, the devil must have made a few mistakes while he's chatting to her up in heaven. Maybe he contradicted himself and she sussed it and she's like, bruh, these stories just aren't making sense. So like a bad breakup, she bounces. After high school, Sherry would go on to attend Kent University, and it's here where she would study journalism, political science, and criminal justice. And Sherry had big plans for her future. She wanted to go on to become a news anchor. She wanted to be a journalist, and let's be real, she had the qualifications for it. But it was in the early 1990s when Sherry realized something. She came to this stark realization about the media. It was controlled by these reptilians, and in fact, all the anchors, they weren't even real people. They were robots. So there's no way she's ever going to get into broadcasting. But lucky for her, the internet is starting to, I guess, become more prominent in society, even though social media was very infant at this point in time. There were chat boards, and she went onto these chat boards to try to warn everybody. As the years would go by, social media started expanding. You had Facebook, you had YouTube. No doubt the devil's involved in all of this. And Sherry herself is a super early adopter to these platforms. And in the meantime, she is pumping out straight banger books like Aliens on the Internet, because some of the commenters that were like leaving troll comments, they were clearly aliens. They weren't like real people. And Sherry knew that. Like, she seen the comment of someone disagreeing with her, and she's like, mate, you're an alien. I know what's going on. You're not going to pull the wool over my eyes, alien. Go back to your reptilian master lords. Go back to them. She would write the book Bible Codes Revealed because, you know, aliens. And later on in 2016, she'd pump out a straight banger called Interview with the Devil, which talks about these walks in heaven and, you know, the devil's plans, man. But amongst all this exposing of the Illuminati and the people really behind the curtain, Sherry was very successful at keeping her personal life out of the media. What is really known is that Sherry was married with 4 children and she lived in Ohio. That's pretty much it. And Sherry herself wasn't just a ghost and poster. She was super active within her community. She would even meet up with some of the members and they would conduct these top secret operations where they'd take on the dark forces, traveling all over the United States with these orgon devices that she had created, which basically had different types of metal shards and a copper wiring that went in a clockwise direction, and it was encased in resin. And Sherry was smart enough to create these devices by hand. And what these devices could do was neutralize negative energy. And in fact, if you had a lot of it, you could neutralize whole areas that were being affected by these reptilians with their negative energy. But you needed to do the work. You needed to know how to do it. And as a person, if you carried one, you could prevent aliens from possessing you. It was serious stuff. And during these cleansing missions, what Sherry and her little group were trying to do was prevent NATO and the Illuminati and the global elite from pushing forward their plans of world domination. And it worked, man. Like, you know, they haven't really taken over yet, or have they? But under the surface of Sherry's teachings laid the fact that the world had been inundated by these demons. Like, it was really, if you really super believed in this stuff, living life was pointless. This whole circus that we call life in the world was going to come to an end very soon if you really followed Sherry's doomsday style teachings, which in my opinion is super destructive. And one of her supporters who would be deeply affected by these teachings was a woman named Kelly Pingley. In 2010, when Kelly was just 20 years old, she would stumble across Sherry's teachings on her website and she would become a devout follower. And Sherry herself would even tell people when she reached out to me, she was contemplating whether she should go off to university or should she dedicate her life to something way more important. And given the fact that, you know, the world's about to end, why go to university? You can be doing the God's work right here, right now. Kelly, like a lot of people, had existential questions. That was pretty much it. And she stumbled across Sherry Schreiner's websites. So from here, Kelly would become an avid poster to Sherry's community. She wouldn't go on to university. She would even write articles that got posted to Sherry's websites. She was exposing NATO. Barack Obama was another one. He's not real. They were exposing everybody, and it was dangerous stuff. Along with that, Kelly would also go on these missions. Again, she's not a post and ghoster, man. She was getting super involved. She'd go on these missions. They'd be cleansing whole areas with their orgon devices. Like, she was about it. But on the 28th of December 2012, 22-year-old Kelly Marie Pingley's body would be found in the woods just outside her home in Michigan. Police would rule her death as a intentional self-unaliving, stating the facts that she drove herself out there and even left a note for loved ones. Sherry and her community of crackpots, saviors, straight away saw through the lies that the police were telling, man. There was a cover-up. And Sherry would blow the whistle on this whole sordid situation. You see, Kelly had been driving her car, minding her own business, when all of a sudden she was ambushed by a NATO death squad. They actually exist. They would take control over her car, and they were the ones that drove her out to the woods. They would then force her to write this unaliving note before they would finish her off and stage the scene to make it look like she did it herself. But for Sherry and the other members of her group, the loss of Kelly was a bitter pill to swallow, but it would only be the first death the group would experience. Like a lot of online communities, the potential for finding love is always present. And for Steve Mineo and Barbara Rogers, this was the case. And although the couple had a 10-year age gap, with Steve only being 32 and Barbara 42, their shared interest in Sherry's online community is how they connected. In 2011, the pair would meet and they would fall madly in love with one another. Things moved quickly, and the couple would move to a home in Pennsylvania together. And the couple were very much outspoken members of Sherry's community. They posted in the group and they would share their thoughts and reply to comments, and they really were very engaging with this community. They'd been in it for years. But by early 2017, things would take a sour turn. Barbara would post to the Facebook group how her and Steven really loved eating medium rare steak, which means it's sort of cooked on the outside but not so much on the inside. Like, it's like chefs love that stuff. This offhanded post of Barbara's would take on a life of its own, and Barbara and Steven could not have seen this coming. Sherry, upon seeing the post, would proclaim that both of them were vampire, witch, reptilian super soldiers. Because who else would eat a steak medium rare, right? And in turn, what would happen is the couple would get ostracized from this group. And you got to remember, Barbara and Steven met each other in this group. They were deeply devoted to the group. They loved the group, and they'd been in it for years at this point. So this was completely devastating. So it hit them hard, particularly Steven. Over the next several months, Steven would spiral with these paranoid thoughts. He was afraid that he would be possessed by these aliens, and the Orgon techniques he'd been taught by Sherry just weren't working. He would repeatedly try to make contact with other members of the group because he had his own theory of what was going on. He's like, the hierarchy within this Sherry's group has been infiltrated by reptilians. And in fact, you know what? I think Sherry herself, I think she's a shill. I think she is a reptilian. She's like she's controlled opposition, man. So he's becoming disillusioned with Sherry's teachings and the whole group. And look at Sherry's face. You can't tell me, maybe that is a reptilian. I mean, if there was one, I would probably think that may be it. But on July 14th, 2017, things would come to a head. Barbara and Steven would go to a local bar in their area of Pennsylvania, and they would have a few drinks together. Although the couple would leave at 2 a.m., police would speak to the barkeep, and he would basically tell them they weren't intoxicated or anything. They seemed pretty cool. The couple, who only lived nearby, would get home a short time after, and Steven says to Barbara, hey, I want to go and shoot my gun in the woods. Let's go and do that. It's a bit odd to be shooting a gun in the woods at 2 a.m., but, you know, joining a cult going against reptilians is odd too, so who am I to judge? And it was while out here, Steven would tell Barbara that he wanted her to shoot him because he wanted to unalive himself, but at the same time he didn't, so he needed somebody else to do it for him because, you know, these reptilians, they're going to possess him, and he was very afraid that they're going to make him do things that he didn't want to do. So things needed to end now. It's at this point where Barbara's like, no, I'm not going to do this. We need to go back inside. It's getting late, and the couple retreat back into their studio apartment. Inside, the argument continues, and Steven points the gun to his head, grabs her hands and puts it around the pistol grip. He's telling her, you need to shoot me, you need to shoot me, and Barbara shoots him. Steven would be shot in the forehead, dropping him stone cold dead on the floor of their apartment. It's 2:38 a.m. when Barbara calls 911, and she says to the dispatcher, my boyfriend had a gun, he told me to hold it here and press the trigger. Oh my God, he's dead. Barbara Rogers would be arrested that night and charged with the murder of Steven Mineo. She would sit in jail, having been refused bail until convicted in March of 2019 of third-degree murder, which basically means it wasn't premeditated. She would subsequently be sentenced to 15 to 40 years in prison. Although Steven's family refute the claims that Barbara made that Steven asked her to do it, given the third-degree murder conviction, the jury clearly bought it. Now, as for Sherry Shriner, there has been no official investigation into her or her group's activities. She's duping people with these outlandish conspiracy theories. I mean, the death of Kelly Pingley, a young woman who gave up her future of going to university and getting a career just to follow Sherry's cult of lunacy. You think they would investigate the circumstances surrounding that, you know, making this woman disillusioned with the world and her future. The murder of Steve Mineo by his girlfriend Barbara Rogers after being falsely labelled vampire witch reptilian super soldiers, which had the pair spiralling out of control and being worried that they were going to be demonically possessed. you think they'd investigate that. But they didn't, and for Sherry Shriner, her death would come on January 7th, 2018 in her home, suffering a heart attack. There would be no post to any of her social media by her family. People would find out about it through the obituaries, but here's where a discrepancy sort of comes into play, because if you look it up, they say that she died in 2021 because Sherry had a lot of aliases, but the 2018 death to me jives more, because on her YouTube channel, that was the last time that she posted, and she was a pretty regular poster to YouTube, and she stopped posting in 2018. So I believe she more than likely died in 2018, and I think maybe other people pretended to be her for some time, because, you know, they're conspiracy theorists too. So she's probably not even dead, man. She's living in Argentina somewhere because she had to go deep underground because the Illuminati, NATO, Barack Obama, they're coming. And I'm not slamming Sherry's beliefs in higher dimensions and extraterrestrials and God versus the devil. I'm not doing that. I just think anybody who comes to us with the answers or claims to have the answers, and there's usually a fee involved there, I think most of the time they're full of shit. And I think we should all have questions of our reality. Be in the world, not of it. Lift ourselves up from the sole focus of self and think about the universe and things that are going around us, I think is super important for your mental health as well. So I somewhat agree with those stuff, and conspiracies are fun, but man, like, don't put your whole life on hold. Like, I'm all about it. Be a free thinker, but like, be very careful subscribing to somebody else's like word or message, because there are a lot of convincing sociopaths out there, let's be honest. And that, folks, closes the chapter on Kelly Marie Pingley and Steven Mineo. May they rest in peace, exploring the ever-knowing and very vast universe, tapping into that ether. May they rest in peace. And as always, stay safe out there in internet land.